October 9, 2023. The sails of the Sydney Opera House are lit in blue and white, the colours of the Israeli flag. But within hours, that iconic building and the night sky around it would glow red, the colour of flames and flares. What began as an act of solidarity with Israel and Jews still reeling from the deadly October 7 terrorist attack by Hamas devolved into an ugly and unsanctioned pro-Palestine demonstration.
Flares were thrown, anti-Semitic slurs chanted, and an Israeli flag set on fire during that illegal pro-Palestinian rally last night at the Opera House.
They were fired up, frenzied. What was meant to be a peaceful pro-Palestine demonstration, anything but.
Over the past 2 years, up to and including the historic peace deal struck just weeks ago, The Australian has been reporting on the conflict in the Middle East, analysing geopolitical developments and sharing the human stories at the centre of the storm. And this week, The Australian has published a collection of our landmark journalism in a book. It's called A Different Country, and it was launched on Wednesday at a very special gathering at the Sydney Opera House.
Nicholas Jensen is The Australian's commentary editor, and he's joining me because today The Australian has held a quite remarkable event at the Opera House in Sydney. Nick, this was an event to mark a couple of years of reporting by The Australian on an issue that has really divided the world, the conflict in the Middle East. And the Opera House was chosen for a very special reason. Why the Opera House?
Well, obviously, Claire, here is the book, by the way, which is A Different Country. But you can see the cover there, harking back to the scenes that occurred at the Opera House just a few days after October 7, obviously, where there was really a kind of gratuitous protest, almost riot-like scenes, burning of the Israeli flags, chanting, anti-Semitic chanting in response to October 7. So I suppose the event we've had today at that very symbolic place is a kind of reclaiming that space to some extent. The imagery of that day, late afternoon and into the evening was very powerful, wasn't it?
Nicholas Jensen is The Australian's commentary editor. He spoke with The Australian's editorial director and the regular host of The Front, Claire Harvey.
Yeah, that's right. The New South Wales government decided to light up the sails of the Opera House in the national colours of Israel, blue and white. Lighting up the sails is something that seems to happen a lot these days. There's always one cause or
everyone,
another.
yeah, that's right.
Is getting the sails lit up. But this decision to cast blue and white onto the Opera House was really a flame that drew a whole lot of moths who were not very pleasant. Protesters who came to the Opera House used this as a moment to demonstrate their feelings about Israel, accusing Israel of all sorts of crimes, including genocide. But this is before Israel had actually responded to the attack of October 7, right?
That's right. And I mean, actually, in a weird way, this is why I think this book is so important, because it sets out the chronology so well, because it has gone on now for so long. But yeah, I mean, that evening, I remember clearly that I think it was New South Wales Police were saying best not for Jews basically go into their own city, which is it was appalling at the time. It's even, just as appalling in retrospect.
So the Australians published this book, which is a collection of our journalism over the past 2 years. Some really beautiful and powerful pieces, many of which were commissioned by you. Tell me about the first of the pieces that we're going to discuss today by Henry Ergas, published not long after October 7, 2023.
Yeah, so Henry, who is Jewish, by the way, it's important to add, he wrote about a week after October 7. So what had happened at the forecourt of the Opera House had already taken place. What had happened in parts of Western Sydney in terms of celebrating October 7 had already taken place. And he wrote this incredibly powerful piece about how what had happened was a civilizational moment. It was clear to a lot of people, I suppose, immediately after it had happened that was the case. And how back home, the celebrations of something so awful, the slaughter of Jews, he spoke about how it had echoes of the Holocaust. he spoke about how during the Nazi period, useful idiots were used as well to denigrate and persecute Jews. But really it was an impassioned piece, I suppose, about how Israel will survive this and will survive its detractors and its haters around the world. And I think, we've published many great things, some of which probably didn't make this book, but I think what's really marked out many of these pieces is they are very personal, and they show great kind of moral clarity, courage, and it's something very close to them.
A lot of our writers who work with us at The Australian, either on staff or as contractors, go about their journalism or their commentary or their analysis in their particular subject matter as experts, but don't really divulge necessarily much about themselves. This was a moment when several people kind of revealed to an audience who it might not have occurred to before that they were Jewish or that they were Israeli.
Yeah.
That's an interesting choice for journalists, given that we're all trained not to make ourselves the story. Commentary blurs the lines a little bit. You must have had some interesting conversations with writers about how much they wanted to reveal about themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, even some of our Jewish colleagues on staff, it was very interesting talking to them about how life had changed for them, radically after October 7, and what it was they were prepared to say. Some people didn't want to write out of fear of retribution. In fact, and this was a first for me as commentary editor, but we were having to publish pieces that had assumed names to protect people who were writing in, outside of journalism. People write for us that were Jewish, that worked in hospitals, in the medical profession and so on.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with one of our Jewish members of staff and saying to them that I was concerned about them revealing that they were Jewish and revealing that they'd spent a lot of time in Israel, because it felt very hot at that particular moment. Of course, it's felt very hot for Jewish people ever since October 7, 2023. And it was about really a whole new generation of Jewish Australians feeling the sting of antisemitism that they might not have encountered before.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there were certainly a lot of people that were writing for us who were Jewish but never had thought, perhaps up until then, to identify themselves so openly as Jewish.
Deborah Conway is a good example of that, isn't she? What happened to Deborah?
So Deborah Conway is a singer-songwriter, and she had expressed support openly for Israel post-October 7, and many of the arts organisations, festivals and so on that she would normally perform at, she was basically cancelled from. She's too controversial. But I think, going to your point before, Claire, I think she's actually a very good example of someone who, I wouldn't presume to know about Deborah Conway's Jewishness, and that actually the events of October 7, and particularly the response and the anti-Semitism we saw since, has been a process of finding or recovering parts of someone's identity or who they are, which is a pretty powerful thing, isn't it?
Yeah. One of your jobs as the editor of the opinion pages, and you often edit our weekend section Inquirer alongside Jenny Campbell, is helping people turn journalism into opinion or analysis or commentary, which is very different. It means getting much more involved, having a point. It's like the difference between writing a university essay where you need to have a point and a school essay where you can just compare a couple of ideas, and demonstrate that you've read the book. One of the interesting things about the post-October 7 world is that it feels like, partly fueled by social media, everyone has to have an opinion on this ancient conflict in the Middle East, which has, when I think a valid opinion to have is, this is awful. Mm-hmm. I feel terrible for everybody.
Yeah.
It's incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
I hope, people stop dying.
Yeah.
Why do you think here in Australia, so far away from that conflict, it was almost impossible for that neutral kind of stance to be expressed?
I kind of think about some of the pieces Paul Kelly has written, and I think it was very clear, perhaps even a couple of weeks out from what happened in Israel, that this issue was going to have such enormous institutional reach that it would kind of be impossible for people to ignore it. Now, that's not to say, by and large, the public in Australia knew intimately what was going on in Gaza, perhaps even cared. But because the protests, demonstrations, the naked acts of anti-Semitism at universities, say, it meant that people that were in charge of institutions needed to respond. Things were happening fast, and because of that, I think it just became an issue that kind of could not be ignored, and it became, I think, a kind of, institutional rupture. I don't know what you think about that, but
yeah, I think it was the third in a series of issues that I think, because of social media, there was an artificial urgency to have an opinion, and then there was an orthodoxy, particularly in the academic and university sector, to have the right kind of opinion.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter first,
Yeah.
then trans rights, or the juxtaposition of trans rights and women's rights, and then the Israel-Gaza conflict. I wonder what the kind of social media content creators who have just stepped into this, I think quite cynically, as a content area are going to do next.
Yeah, exactly.
There's going to have to be something else.
Well, absolutely. And I think, though, with the social media point, and is interesting, and I know there's many great pieces in here that pick up on this, which is that for many people who are of university age, we would think that being anti-Zionist or being anti-Semitic, say, is just part of the kind of progressive package. And it might also belong next to, radical climate action and so on.
Decolonising the curriculum.
Exactly. I mean, we know all these kind of themes that are core to that package. But equally, I think that's tricky territory, because anti-Semitism is something that's very specific and has a long history. So I think it's difficult, because on the one hand it's very unique, and I think when we saw a lot of it play out on our streets and at university campuses or even in workplaces, that somehow it's still picking up on old strands of a very ancient idea. So even if it is part of some weird woke package or whatever, it actually is still unique, different, and dangerous.
I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think one of the things that this has revealed for me is that there's a latent anti-Semitism under the surface from the progressive end of politics, or people who think that they're progressives, right over to the far right, and people who think that they want to be fascists.
Yeah.
Were you shocked by the fact that anti-Semitism was running underneath us?
Yeah, I was shocked. I mean, now perhaps this is kind of thing I would say. I'm not Jewish, so perhaps I wouldn't be alive to it in the same way as a Jewish person would, of course. But, Australia has a proud Jewish history, and Geoffrey Blaney's magnificent essay, which is in this book, sets it out very well. Jews have been here since the founding of Australia, since 1788. They've made enormous contributions in political life, in philanthropy, in business, in medicine, and so much. Universities. So to see this kind of recrudescence of something that which I felt never really belonged here, was a shock. How did you experience it?
Yeah, I have lots of Jewish friends just sort of by accident. I've kind of always had friends who are Jewish who are in and out of my life from school, and I vividly remember being a schoolgirl sitting on the bus in Canberra with my friend who had Israeli heritage, and two boys in the seat behind us. One of them said to the other, "Can I borrow $1?" And this is the 80s when $1 would actually buy you quite a lot of lollies. And the other one said no. And he said, "Oh, you're such a Jew."
Mm-hmm.
And my friend, Rebecca, turned around and gave him an absolute tongue lashing. And that was my first experience of, vicarious anti-Semitism. You know, I felt it through her deep emotional reaction, and I was so shocked that it was a thing to call someone Jewish for being stingy. You know, so I've always been aware that it existed. I think what has saddened me, and this is a bit the same about the trans and women's rights issue really, I think there's a latent misogyny in our society, and a lack of understanding about what feminism is all about and what women's spaces are for. And I think it's the same thing with Judaism and anti-Semitism. It runs underneath, and it doesn't take much to pierce the surface and for it to come out.
Yeah.
It's depressing.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not at uni now.
No, so am I.
I mean, we're both arts graduates, right?
That's right.
You know,
yeah, exactly.
I don't think I'd fit in on an arts campus now.
I think it would be interesting to see what, if we transplanted events back, 10, 20 years, what they would be like. I think one thing that would be different is that we would have institutions that exercise authority in a way that they don't do anymore. I think that's been a massive part of all of this, which is parts of an institution will rebel. They'll take up an activist cause. They'll feel strongly about it. Now, to some extent, there's kind of nothing wrong with that. But each institution, say university, is governed by their own codified principles. And it's up to the boss to exercise those. And that just has not happened.
They were terrified of their own student body, weren't they?
Yeah,
the
I think so.
encampments is a great example of that.
The encampment's a great example. And I mean, we published a piece by Mark Scott, who's the Vice-Chancellor of Sydney University. Now, I don't want to verbal him, but I remember that piece very clearly, which was essentially presenting a very high bar for free speech. That's to say, these encampments should go ahead, these students are exercising their free speech. Now, obviously, that was complicated a bit when students were going into lecture halls and saying, you need to listen to me, you need to listen to my views on what's happening in Gaza. I mean, that's a clear infringement of a student's right to be taught without interruption and so on. But what I found really interesting about the argument he set out there was that by his own standard, he's essentially saying it would have been fine if, say, a far-right group encamped out the front of Sydney University and said awful things about Indigenous students or awful things about LGBTQI students. Do we really think that the university would have accepted that? No, not of course not.
Mm. And the opportunity for pro-Israel or pro-Jewish students to stage a matching demonstration was kind of limited by the fact that, as Jewish people I think have long felt in Western society, they wanted to not make themselves a target. They wanted to recede.
Yeah.
A few very courageous people did take that action, and I felt for them. It was scary.
Yeah. No, there were some very brave people that put themselves out on a limb, didn't they?
So one of the things about this book is that in journalism, in newspapers, we sit on a vast inventory of content that we've published over 60 years of this masthead alone. And we don't often do anything with that inventory, do we?
No.
We don't dredge it up.
We've got this incredible archive.
We do. But it's down in the basement in a bunch of dusty binders, and we can go and have a look at it. And it's a little bit more available now thanks to the digitisation of journalism. But it's beautiful to have this kind of analogue version of it, isn't it?
It is. And it's been beautifully produced by our colleagues. I mean, I'm here plugging it, but I have to say, apart from the commissioning stages and knowing some of these pieces relatively well, it's been wonderfully produced by our colleagues. What I like about it, Claire, I don't know what you think, but it sets out a chronology. A lot of things have happened, so this sets it out. So it's a testament of record, but it's also a testament of Australia, I suppose.
Nicholas Jensen is the Australian's commentary editor. He was speaking with Claire Harvey. A Different Country features commentary by Henry Ergas, Barry Weiss, Greg Craven and others, and it's available now. Plus, you can read Australia's best commentary right now at theaustralian.com.au.